Hey guys, Robert and Reaper here. So yep, I'm here at the Odyssey once again. This weekend is the Big Screen Weekend at Cineworld. All tickets, all formats, £4, absolute bargain. So I'm going to take advantage of that. I'm about to head in to see Interstellar in IMAX. Yeah, look, love Nolan, one of my favorite directors. So the opportunity to see one of his films in IMAX, you know, the format his films are made for £4, yeah, couldn't not take advantage. So I'm gonna head in, get some snacks, and get seated for Interstellar in IMAX. Let's go, baby. Alrighty, so I've got my Cineworld scratch card. Now it's time to go into the IMAX view. So I've got my popcorn here and a mixed icy, ready for a bit of IMAX Nolan. So, Interstellar. I'm back from seeing it in IMAX. This is, of course, directed by Christopher Nolan, and he also co-wrote it with his brother, Jonathan Nolan. And look, this is my first time actually seeing a Nolan film in IMAX. You know, I think the closest I've come is, you know, the fact that the Blu-rays come with the IMAX scenes, which is something I appreciate very much. But so obviously, I was very excited to like fully, properly experience, you know, a particularly beloved film from one of my favorite directors. You know, this is one that has really grown in stature over its 10 years. You know, regularly selling out IMAX screenings. So I was incredibly excited to be a part of that experience for myself. But is this an IMAX experience that lives up to the hype? Let's find out. So in the film, Earth is slowly beginning to become uninhabitable, with all the crops slowly dying out. However, there is hope, as ex-NASA pilot and farmer Joseph Cooper is approached to take part in a top-secret NASA project known as Lazarus. His mission? To save Earth by finding a new planet for humanity to inhabit. However, for the mission to be pulled off, it requires great sacrifice from Coop, as it requires him to leave behind everything and everyone that he has known and loved. So obviously with Nolan being the poster boy for IMAX, you know, having pioneered it to be the immersive large format that we know and love that's been used across every big blockbuster over the last decade or so, my expectations going into my first proper Nolan IMAX experience were high. You know, I was expecting something rich, immersive, and thrilling, something that you couldn't get anywhere else, even a standard cinema screen. Obviously, the film's fantastic, truly, truly brilliant, but to truly appreciate it, you gotta see it in IMAX, because, oh my god, it is immense. Obviously, it is a beautifully made film, you know, where you fully get your money's worth out of seeing it in IMAX. You know, it's shot by Hoyt van Hoytema, Nolan's go-to director of photography, and just, you know, everything about the film, whether it be the vastness of space or the black hole, or even the planets they visit, you know, notably the snow planet, where, you know, it's described as being cold and stark but beautiful. Even the vast cornfields on Earth, all of it is beautifully captured. You know, it is vibrant and rich in contrast, and also because it's shot in IMAX film, you get the expanded aspect ratio. And the expanded ratio is utilized wonderfully to truly bring the scope of this film to life. You know, as we get full entire sequences in this expanded ratio. It makes it all feel bigger and more exciting. It's a visual feast. It's also a fantastic audio experience. Obviously, Hans Zimmer did the score, and yeah, it's fantastic. It is exciting and majestic, truly bringing the thrilling high stakes of its central mission to life. Really enhancing that. Iconic tracks, notably being the cornfield chase and No Time for Caution. Zimmer is an absolute master, but also they the real piece de resistance is the sound mix. Oh my god, it is an absolute beast. You know, you really feel like the thrusters of the of the NASA rockets taking off, or the docking sequences, and even things like the aforementioned cornfield chase. You really feel that travel across the auditorium, and it feels so rich and immersive. Yeah, as an IMAX experience, it is an 11 out of 10. Yeah, it is so fantastically made. You more than get your money's worth. And I know Nolan tends to get a bit of flack from some online for his films being cold and emotionally distant, but I think the emphasis on creating thrilling, immersive experiences is what makes his films so gripping. But here he actually does lean into that emotional side, obviously because he's not written it himself. He's co-written it with his brother, and it works. It really, really does. Obviously, there's a lot of dialogue here that is, heavy scientific theory, a lot of quantum physics speak, but where it should feel like, dense technobabble, it feels light and consistently compelling to listen to. Why? Because of the film's emotional anchor, its overarching theme that love transcends everything. This is the film's emotional hook, and this is what makes it so compelling and gripping to watch. Obviously, we have tons of well written characters worth investing in. Obviously, we have Coop, played fantastically by Matthew McConaughey. He's he really sells this family man who has to burden the weight of leaving behind everyone that he loves in order to save millions more families just like his. Obviously, notably, the scene where he gets the video messages from his kids as they've grown up, and he breaks down in tears. He really sells that. It hits hard. Everyone else around him is great as well, in fairness. As we have Anne Hathaway as Dr. Brandt, who is a companion on Coop's mission. And she does a great job as this woman on a mission to reunite with a long lost lover. That is her, emotional anchor, and it's what keeps us invested in her. And Hathaway does a great job with it, and her dynamic with McConaughey is fantastic as well. It really allows us to keep invested in these characters during this high stakes mission. Of course, being a Christopher Nolan film, we also have the wonderful Michael Caine as Brandt's father. And yeah, look, he's Michael Caine, he's a wonderful, wonderful presence. And in a rather lovely touch, I love the little relationship he had with Coop's daughter, Murph, played as an adult by Jessica Chastain, who again, great. She does a great job as this woman who's harboring a lot of resentment for her towards her father for leaving her all those years ago, and she really sells the emotional weight of that. Also, I got to admit, the casting for the younger Murph, Mackenzie Foy, pretty spot on. Casey Affleck also did a great job as Coop's son, Tom. Someone who's who's dealt a pretty tragic hand in his family life. He's also played as a teenager by a young Timothy Chalamet, so we have Nolan to thank for Chalamet being the star he is. Of course, rounding things out, we have Matt Damon as the cowardly Dr. Mann. He is great as really selling just how much of an absolute pussy he is. I absolutely hated Man, and and Damon played it so well. Of course, it's these great characters that really carry things along. Really keeps us invested in things. Allows these hard hitting emotional moments to really land. Not least in the climax, where we get some really emotionally potent and moving reveals and payoffs to seemingly inconsequential things from earlier on in the film. Stuff that makes you go, oh, some real penny drop moments, but not in a sort of but not in a sort of aha, bet you didn't see that coming. Like it feels very much logically consistent and perfectly consistent with things earlier on in the film, and it allows to really land with that added emotional punch. Yeah, coming out of this, I came out of this just moved. Overall, Interstellar is a strikingly made, ambitious, and moving sci fi epic that is, without a doubt, one of Nolan's best films. See it in IMAX to truly believe it. Out of 10, Interstellar gets a 10. So let me know down in the comments, have you seen Interstellar? What did you think of it? What's your favourite Nolan film? And how many of his films have you seen in IMAX? Let me know all that down in the comments. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're new. And don't forget to turn on post notifications so you don't miss an upload.